There's a certain kind of person who, when you ask them what their Instagram is, just quietly says, "I don't really use it." And something happens in the room. A pause. A slight tilt of the head. Like you just told someone you don't own a microwave. Not offensive. Just unexpected. Slightly suspicious. Like there must be a reason. Like something must be wrong. And here's the thing. People assume the worst. They think you're antisocial. Disconnected. Maybe a little strange. Maybe hiding something, because in a world where everyone documents everything, every meal, every sunset, every minor personal victory, the person who simply doesn't participate becomes oddly difficult to read. And difficult to read, in this era, somehow translates to difficult to trust. But what if the psychology behind not using social media is actually far more interesting than anyone gives it credit for? What if the people who stepped away, or never started, aren't missing something? What if they found something instead? Let's be honest about what social media actually is. At a psychological level, it is a system designed, by some of the smartest behavioral engineers in the world, to keep your attention as long as possible. The infinite scroll. The variable reward of likes and comments. The carefully engineered fear of missing out if you close the app. These aren't accidents. Psychologist B.J. Fogg, who literally ran the persuasive technology lab at Stanford, has said publicly that the platforms were built using the same psychological principles as slot machines. Pull the lever. Maybe you get a reward. Maybe you don't. But you'll keep pulling. Most people never question the machine, they just live inside it. The person who doesn't use social media, at some level, consciously or not, stepped outside it. And that is a much braver and more psychologically significant act than it sounds. Here's what researchers have actually found about people who limit or avoid social media. A 2018 study from the University of Pennsylvania found that reducing social media use to just 30 minutes a day led to significant reductions in depression, loneliness, and anxiety. Not eliminating it entirely, just 30 minutes. The people who aren't on it at all aren't just protecting their time. They're protecting something much harder to name. Something that feels like mental quiet. Like the ability to have a thought that belongs only to them. Like the experience of a moment that doesn't immediately need to be turned into content. Because here's something nobody talks about. Social media doesn't just consume your time. It changes how you experience your own life. When you're constantly documenting, you're no longer fully living. You're producing. And at some point, your most personal moments start feeling like raw material. Your grief, your joy, your ordinary Tuesday, all of it becomes something to potentially share. Something to frame. Something to perform. The person who doesn't use social media is often just someone who quietly refused to turn their life into a performance. And that's not antisocial. That's actually deeply self-aware. Psychologists who study authenticity, particularly researchers working in the tradition of Carl Rogers, describe psychological health as the ability to live from your actual inner experience rather than from an externally performed version of yourself. And social media, by its very design, rewards the performance. The curated version. The highlight reel. The version of you that gets the most likes. Over time, that creates something researchers call the presentation self, a polished, public identity that slowly starts competing with your real one. You begin to experience your life through the lens of how it would look if you posted it. And when that lens becomes permanent, something quiet and personal inside you starts to shrink. The person who isn't on social media never developed that lens. Or they broke it, deliberately, because they noticed what it was doing. And what it was doing was making them feel less like themselves. Now here's something that might surprise you. People who don't use social media are not, on average, less connected than people who do. They tend to invest more deeply in fewer relationships. They call instead of comment. They show up instead of react with an emoji. The connections they have tend to run deeper because they require actual effort, actual presence, rather than a passive double tap from a scrolling thumb. There's a term in psychology called parasocial relationships, one-sided emotional bonds that people develop with people they follow online but have never actually met. Social media is built on a foundation of these. You feel close to someone. You feel like you know them. But they don't know you exist. And slowly, those parasocial connections start taking up emotional energy that could have gone toward real ones. The person without social media doesn't have that drain. Their emotional energy goes somewhere real. And that's not isolation. That's clarity about what connection actually means. But let's talk about something more honest. Because not everyone who avoids social media is doing it from a place of pure psychological wisdom. Some people left because it was hurting them. Because they noticed the comparison spiral. Because they caught themselves at 2 a.m. feeling terrible about a life that, objectively, was completely fine, just not as shiny as what they'd been scrolling through. Because they realized the app was making them feel small on a daily basis and they couldn't justify continuing. And that's not weakness. That's self-knowledge in action. That's someone who ran an honest internal experiment and made a decision based on actual evidence from their own life. Your mental health is not a political statement. Protecting it is not a personality quirk. Sometimes logging off for good is just the most logical thing a person can do. There's also the attention question. Because your attention is genuinely one of the most valuable things you own. Every hour you spend scrolling is an hour your brain could have been building something, learning something, resting in a way that actually restores rather than stimulates. Psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying what he called flow, the state of deep, focused engagement where your skills meet a meaningful challenge and time disappears. That state produces some of the deepest human satisfaction available. It requires uninterrupted attention. And uninterrupted attention is the one thing social media is specifically designed to prevent. The person who protects their attention, who keeps it long and whole and available, has access to something increasingly rare. The ability to go deep. The ability to finish things. The ability to think thoughts that don't dissolve after 3 seconds because a notification arrived. Depth requires protection. And some people have chosen to protect it. So here's what I want you to hear, whether you've never had social media, or you left, or you're sitting there wondering if you should. Not using social media doesn't make you weird. It makes you someone who decided their inner life was worth more than their follower count. Someone who chose presence over performance. Someone who would rather have 3 real conversations than 300 surface interactions. You are not behind. You are not missing out on something essential. You are, in a very real sense, opting out of a system that was never designed with your well-being in mind, and opting into something quieter, slower, and ultimately more yours. The world will keep scrolling. That's fine. You don't have to. If this resonated with something you've been quietly carrying, something you felt but never quite had the words for, I'd genuinely love to hear from you in the comments. What made you step back? What did you find when you did? And if you're still figuring it out, stick around. There's a lot more of this kind of psychology here, honest, human, and always worth the time.